Okay, we'll make a start on the next session now then. Before we do, I just wanted to remind everyone of the stalls at the other end of the bar. We've got 3 traders there today. We have, it's upside down, the Earth Shop, selling a variety of products there. Next to them, the Fudge People, selling lots of different flavours of fudge. And we also have Woodview Gardens, who are selling peat-free compost and a number of other garden supplies. So take a look at those when you have some time. But our next talk is from James Vessey-Miller, who is the coordinator of the South East Essex Green Party. He's going to be talking about the circular economy.
Thank you very much. Hello. Little bit nervous. It's been a while since I've done a presentation like this. I think the last time I was doing this was in university and college, and I was talking about LGBT rights, which is, it's something I'm much more versed in than the topic I'm going to be talking about today. I profess to be by no means any kind of expert. This is just something that I find absolutely fascinating, and I was privileged enough that in my last job before I became a publican, I actually worked in a company that was doing manufacturing of gas detection and safety systems and all that kind of stuff. Basically, my job was the continuous improvement specialist. So my entire remit was just being able to sit at my computer and research all of these kind of pie-in-the-sky ideas, and it was wonderful. And one of the things that I stumbled across was businesses were starting to talk about material sustainability and this wonderful thing called the circular economy, which hopefully I'll be able to articulate and actually explain to you today. Right then. I know what you're all thinking. Circular economy, massively, massively boring. It's just money and just banks and really irritating things. Well, actually, no. This is more of a set of design principles. We heard Graham Burnett yesterday talking about permaculture and talking about the kind of the inbuilt sustainability and renewability of these kind of systems. And circular economic thinking is actually not too far away from that. It's not that boring, I promise. So what is a circular economy? Well, there'll be lots of various different words in this kind of presentation that are just generally rubbish, but I'll try and kind of translate it into plain English for you. But the Waste and Resources Action Programme, WRAP, which if you're not aware of them, is well worth looking into. They do a lot around recycling and material sustainability, but they define it as a circular economy is an alternative to a traditional linear economy, which is a make, use and dispose model, in which we keep resources in use for as long as possible, extract the maximum value from them while they're in use, and then recover and regenerate the products and materials at the end of each service life. Most of that will mean nothing to you because it's just dictionary speak. But Let's kind of first take what the traditional linear economy is. So this is how we exist at the moment. So the linear economy looks a little bit like this. We take stuff out of the ground. We take virgin materials, whether that be wood, trees. We dig up the ground for coal and for metals and for various other kind of things. We take things out of the ground. What we then do is we then make them into things. We make them into products, we make them into houses, we make them into roads, into cities. Everything that you see in here that is not biological is something that has been part of the make process. We then use them for a relatively short amount of time. When we're talking in terms of the planet, of the history of the planet, the time in which you have your toothbrush, which feels like it might last quite a long time, is actually a very, very tiny amount of time. And then what do? We make these wonderful buildings, roads, towns, cities, products. Well, then they just go to waste. We either burn them or bury it. You can look into as much as you wish, but generally speaking, all of the products in which we make as a society and as a culture either end up being burnt or buried in some kind of capacity. And this has been pretty much exactly the same since the start of the Industrial Revolution. So previous to the Industrial Revolution, we had lots of local towns and communities that would make things that were out of relatively renewable materials, and then after that was done, it would get kind of buried and it would just naturally compost down. But since the Industrial Revolution, we've kind of been following this massive path of take, make, waste. And it might feel like this takes a very long time to get from this stage to this stage. Sometimes over the course of one person's entire lifespan. Sometimes when we're talking about buildings, they could last 400, 500 years, if they're lucky enough to stand. But generally speaking, this is the way in which we do things. And, as far as I can see, the world's absolutely fine. We have absolutely no problems in our society, and everyone lives a blissful, wonderful life with no problems with the environment or anything. Let's start with take. There very obviously is a problem in the way that our society works, in the way that we, in the ways that we make things. But we'll start with where it is that we get things from. You'll be very familiar with when people start talking about virgin extract resources being coal, metals, stones, everything that you use to build not just the phones in your pocket, but great skyscrapers. It's exactly the same process. We have to get all of those materials from somewhere. And most of the time they come out of the ground from massive, great big open mines like this, which just, I could do an entire presentation on the ecological damaging properties of running a massive, great big open cast mine like that. Incredibly damaging to our landscape. But that's not really the full extent of it. We've managed to find ourselves all sorts of various different rare things. And one of those things, relatively speaking, is oil. And so you see, we started in kind of the 1850s getting out absolutely tiny, tiny amounts of oil. I think it began in Germany. There was an engineer from one of the companies over there discovered oil and started working out how it is that could be used and how it could be used to help mechanise the world. It was seen as the future from coal. It was the smokeless society, a new, clean, green energy. And what we found is that we get to about the 1900s and the turn of the 20th century, people were like, oh, this is fantastic. This is how it's going to power our societies. It's going to revolutionise exactly what we want. So we need lots of it. So production for oil and the discovery of oil shot up. And we thought, wonderful, this is going to continue for ages. There's actually a really good video on YouTube that was done in, I think, about the 40s or 50s. And it was one of the American oil companies talking about how this phenomenon called peak oil. And they were expecting that by sort of the 60s or 70s, we would find all the oil that there is in the world and that we'd slowly start to run out. So even back as far as the 40s and 50s, people were starting to think of what a post-oil world would look at. But as you can see, kind of it gets to like the 40s and 50s, and it didn't really stop there. We started finding more and creative ways of finding it until the state that we are now, and where our countryside and various other very extreme ways of getting oil and natural gas out of the ground, things like fracking, which I don't know how many of you in this room will be aware of the process of fracking, but it's called hydraulic fracturing. And basically what they do is they do a geological survey of a very wide area of land in the hopes that there is some kind of shale gas or oil quite far and deep buried in all of the rocks. And conventional kind of oil recovery methods can't get this. So what they do is they build two pipes. And they put one pipe down with pressurised water and various other chemicals. And basically what they do is they pressurise the rock underneath the ground. It expands those cracks. The oil then seeps into that cracks, and then they pump all of the water with all the oil in it out the other side. And the problem with this is that it causes massive geological instability. It causes, you've seen those videos of people in the States where they turn on the cold tap and there's methane, and they can light their taps, and you just get this pour of fire straight from the taps. But ecologically speaking, fracking is probably one of the most dangerous ways we've ever found of getting oil. But it's got to this stage now where we're hitting the kind of like the top of this bell curve up here. We're starting to get to the point where we're running out of oil, and we will naturally run out of oil. But what does an oil-less society look like? Well, thankfully, generally speaking, societies have started to get on board with this. But when we're talking about material sustainability, we have a bit of a problem when it comes to oil. We've now got to this point whereby our entire society is entirely predicated pretty much on one commodity. Global markets, our entire societies are based on this continuously expanding. And obviously, as we find out, in a finite system, things aren't endless. We see wood. People like to think of wood and various palm oils and various other kind of renewable oil technologies as something that could theoretically go on endlessly. And to a certain extent, some of the more renewable power sources like biogases and things are somewhat better. We can plant them, and in a couple of years we can then harvest them, and that's a relatively good circular model. It's not just a case of having to blow up the ground and hope that there's oil under there. As we're seeing in the Amazon, massive amounts of woods are now starting to be completely torn down because The Brazilians and various other kind of countries in South America have worked out that actually if you just take down all of the rainforest that just seems to be in the way, and you put that land to better use for agriculture, or you put that land to better use for growing things like palm oil, much more profitable. Nobody makes money off a rainforest apart from, those scenic tours and things, but, once you've got that big square of land, you can actually do something with it. But in a finite system, things run out. Oil, trees, space, everything. Having our entire economy predicated on this notion of endless and consistent growth is eventually one day going to stop and fail and collapse. That takes our first bit out. So the linear economy is entirely predicated on us having an infinite amount of natural resources that we can constantly tap at. And that's a fallacy. We don't have those infinite resources. There's the second one. In the earlier days of the Industrial Revolution, it was sold to us as a society that when we mechanise the world, it would make it easier for humans, and we will start to create these products that will make our lives easier. We'll start to create these products that will genuinely make our lives better. And we have seen that. As a generally Western culture, we have massively benefited from those industrial revolutionary processes and the new ways in which they found of doing things. But in the last kind of 50 years or so, we've started making things that are no longer of directly immediate benefit. And we're starting to see that our society is starting to make products that aren't necessary. We're starting to find that our society is starting to make products that don't actually help us as much as we'd want, and that have these kind of secondary problems to them. One of the big ones being cars. Car manufacturers at the end of the war, especially in America, aggressively sold this idea that a car equals freedom, and that you couldn't be a functioning adult if you didn't have a car, and they were sold as sexy, luxurious things that you couldn't possibly live without. And cars are just one example, but they have a direct effect. As we've seen over the last 100 years or so, from the 60s to today, the global CO2 concentrations in our upper atmosphere, and generally as well air pollution and air quality, have massively declined. The amount of CO2 in our atmosphere, this is now undisputed science, as we heard from John Fuller yesterday. Anyone that tells you that CO2 increase in the atmosphere does not equate global warming, wrong. There is absolutely indisputable science now. There's no longer any doubt, or that's unproven. This is hard science. The more CO2 we have in the atmosphere, the higher the temperature our world and our planet is going to be. It looks relatively innocuous, but this is horrendous. This is absolutely devastating. We've now got to the point where we have exceeded 400 parts per million for the first time, as I think John Fuller was saying, in the last 3 million years. 250 million years. Thank you, Dennis. So it's nice to have an encyclopedia. But the last time that CO2 levels were this high, as we heard from John Fuller yesterday, there were global extinction events. We are currently witnessing the 6th mass extinction. It's called the Anthropocene, which basically means that it's an extinction caused by human activity. Potentially, as I think Graham was talking about yesterday, up to 80% of all natural biodiversity might have been lost in the last 50 years. And when you think of the entire span of the Earth's history, if the entire Earth's history was 1 calendar year, humans arrived, I think, about a week ago. We found oil about 2 minutes ago, and in the last 10 seconds, we've just killed 80% of all biodiversity. When you put it in that kind of context as to the rapid nature, over the course of one human life, it doesn't seem very quick. For the older people in the room here, you will remember a time in which there was a much larger natural biodiversity. And I'm not just talking about the large animals that you see day to day. I'm talking about the bacteria, the fungi, the plants, the weeds, all of those things that you probably didn't notice are now gone, but that were crucial to the natural balance of life on this earth. I credit this man solely with the reason why I'm here and why I do what it is I do. If you don't recognise him, he's a very cool chap called Al Gore. In about 2000, he went up against George Bush in America trying to become the President of the United States. And I think it's a crying shame that he didn't. Al Gore went on and has always been a very passionate environmentalist. If you haven't seen his multi-award-winning film, An Inconvenient Truth, then get out of under your rock and go and watch it. It's free on YouTube, and I think they released it free on the An Inconvenient Truth website. It's about an hour and a half, but it's an hour and a half that will completely change your outlook on exactly what it is that we as a society are standing here today trying to achieve. He told us back in 2006 that there was a problem with regards to how it is that we lived, what it is that we were doing as a society, and the risks that we have. You know, we heard from Extinction Rebellion yesterday telling us about how they were the canaries in the coal mine, telling us that we have a serious problem, we need to deal with it. I think actually we've known this science for the best part of 100 years now, but for me it was Al Gore. And Al Gore has been completely proven right. He said that as CO2 keeps going up in the atmosphere, we will get hotter and hotter and hotter climates, our natural biodiversity will completely decline, and we are in serious risk. This is very, very risk territory. Just look at that statement. The 20 hottest years on record, since records began, we've been going, for the best part of 200 years, the 20 hottest years on record have happened within the last decade or so. That's terrifying. We see a natural upward inclination trend in the CO2 amount in our atmosphere, and we're now getting hotter and hotter climates. We're seeing the Amazon and Australia on fire. We are starting to see global droughts in and around Africa and the Mediterranean. We are starting to see China with serious air quality pollution problems. We're starting to see, just even in our own country, we're genuinely quite wonderful in the British, in the UK, that the British, we moan about the weather all the time, but genuinely we have quite a moderate climate. We're seeing entire towns and villages after extreme storm after extreme storm flood on a regular basis. Did we listen to Al Gore? No, of course we didn't. Why would we? He's just some mad tree-hugging hippie. Did we listen to those in the 60s? No. Are we going to listen to Extinction Rebellion now? Who knows? But the way it is that we fundamentally live our society and our entire economy is predicated on this continuous use of natural resources. This is the Deepwater Horizon oil spill. Happened in the Gulf of Mexico. They were just doing routine oil drilling, and what we tend to find is that the more that we're looking for oil, the more in which we're trying to find these virgin extract resources, the more our natural world is suffering. Every time it gets harder and harder for us to find those natural resources, it's actually the ecology around us. We are part of the world. We are not masters of it. We are not gods. We are part of an ecology. We only survive if our entire ecology is there to back us up and support us. And if we keep following this economic model of the products that we create hurting the world and scarring our landscape, we're going to soon find that the ecology that supports us won't be there anymore. And about 20 or 30 years ago, even when Al Gore was talking in 2006, we had a real opportunity to change the way in which we were doing it over a good and slow amount of time to be able to just mitigate some of these risks. We're now at the stage that we don't have long left. And we're not just talking about carbon in the atmosphere, we're talking about almost every facet in which our society currently exists. Problem number 2, the things that we make are killing our world. If you look at the phones in our pockets, they have very, very rare earth materials that are being dug up in some of the poorest countries in the world. When we look at the cars that we use, again, lots of metal, lots of rubber that are being transported from Asia to America, back to Asia, into Europe to be put together, and then they end up in the UK. The massive carbon footprint in which our economy exists is a problem. And even if you relatively, eco products, you can have your bamboo toothbrushes. Well, that bamboo, where's that grown? That's grown on the other side of the planet. How's it got here? It's got here either via commercial shipping or by air post. It's really not looking good for the linear economy, is it? We're starting to realise that actually we have a problem with where we get all of these resources. We haven't got an infinite amount of natural resources that we can just use up in perpetuity. We've also got a bit of a problem with the stuff that we're making. When we're done with it, what happens? Let's talk rubbish. The UK generated 222.9 million tonnes of total waste in 2016. These were some of the recent figures I could find. I couldn't find for 2018. Ta-da! 104 million tonnes of that, nearly 50% was recycled. That seems like a magnificent achievement, and it is. Thanks to the EU and various things, we've been given various targets to try and do as much as we can to recycle the amount of waste that we generate, and we're doing relatively well. 52.3 million tonnes, which, in comparison to the 104, doesn't seem too much. 52.3 million tonnes still going to landfill. Doesn't seem like too much of a problem. Comparatively, that's there. 52.3 million tonnes looks a lot like this. Rubbish. The recycling myth. This is a project that the GreenFest did, I think in 2018. Most of the people in this room will quite happily recycle a lot of the packaging waste, or the plastics, or the cardboard, things that we get our food in. And we, with relatively clean conscience, can say, haha, we are environmentally motivated. As we would say in marketing, you are the low-HAS demographic, which is lifestyles of health and sustainability. You are people who are clued on to the green way of doing things. You are people who are starting to think, aha, I can make these positive green choices. Let's do the recycling at home. As a local business owner, we try to do as much as we can with regards to recycling things. All of our aluminium and metals, they get recycled. All of our glass, they get recycled. And we're going to do as much as we can to actually start recycling things. The problem is that when we say recycling, very, very small percentage of actually what it is that we recycle in this country is actually recycled or repurposed into something. What happens when we say recycling is it's very cheap to send it to South Asia. In many places, a waste management system exists that claims to dispose, incinerate, or recycle collected plastic waste. In reality, most of the plastic waste that we generate in the UK, as high-income countries, is transported to low- and middle-income countries where the plastic waste is imported to be recycled or further processed. That seems like a relatively good idea. We get to ship it over to South Asia. They get to deal with our trash problem. In reality, what's happened is that in January 2018, some of those countries are starting to say, no, we're not very happy about the fact that you keep shipping all of your waste over here, because actually, in reality, though you put it in the recycling, there's not really a lot that we can do with this material. So China have finally said that actually, we're not very interested in taking your rubbish anymore. In 2018, China banned most imports of plastic wastes, and Southeast Asian nations eagerly jumped in to fill that gap, with Malaysia taking the lead by importing nearly 500,000 tonnes between January and July alone. An international trade system based on multilateral agreements is supposed to regulate the selling, buying, importing and exporting of recyclable plastic wastes. A recent Greenpeace investigation shows that this international trade system is broken. The imported waste is often not processed correctly or dumped or burned in essentially unregulated ways in violation of international agreements. Basically, the stuff that you're putting in your recycling is not in any way recycled. It's sent off to some poor Southeast Asian country where they burn it or bury it so that you get a chance to clear your conscience. We have a situation where, especially in the rich countries in the world, this symbol doesn't mean that symbol anymore. It now means this symbol. What is happening is that we like to think that we're starting to, cardboard and various plastics and metals go in this kind of circular function, and, you put your bean cans in the recycling and it gets turned into yet another bean can. That's what the councils tell us. What's actually happening is we're just putting all of our waste in one place in Southeast Asia where we don't really have to think about it. One of the other recent things, incinerators have had one hell of a PR makeover. Incinerators in the 70s were kind of started to be shut down because of all of the vast amounts of carbon dioxide and dioxins that you put off into the atmosphere, and people are like, no to just burning our trash anymore. We want to move to recycling, we want to move to more regulated and ethical landfill. Yes, that is a thing, look that up. They're now called waste to energy, and it's being marketed as clean energy. The idea that you take your cardboard, your garden waste, basically anything that burns, and it's put in a very, very high pressure and high temperature incinerator, and they generate electricity out of it, seemingly killing two birds with one stone. Get rid of your bin rubbish, and it generates relatively renewable electricity. I have a massive problem with that bit. It's not clean energy, it's just incineration with a fancy title over it. I refer you to the earlier graph. Nuclear waste. Not a lot of people think of nuclear waste when we're talking about things that we make and what it is that we do after them. Nuclear waste, if you listen to people like the Liberal Democrats, are a perfectly good, clean and renewable green energy. Nuclear waste is by no means renewable, and actually it creates some of the most hazardous and radioactive waste that we as humans have absolutely no idea what to do with it. What happens is that all those isotopes get concentrated into small little boxes, and this is in Sellafield. This isn't that far away. This is up on the northeast coast and Cumbria, northwest coast, sorry. And what happens is that these little boxes sit in storage, guarded by people with arms and various weapons and things, because we as humans have absolutely no idea what to do with all of this spent radioactive fuel. We currently have absolutely no way of repurposing. We can't just put it in landfill. Someone could get it and could turn it into weapons. We can't burn it. It doesn't burn. What do we do with it? We can't bury it, we can't burn it, you can't recycle it, you can't just kind of charge it back up again. It's not a phone. What do you do? And as you know from things like Chernobyl, nuclear power is not something really to be sniffed at and not to be looked at. Massive, massive consequences can happen if any of that waste gets out. What happened in Chernobyl is one of the boilers exploded and it spreaded radioactive waste over the neighbouring town of Pripyat. I'm sure you've all heard the story. They now have created, because of that incident, the most dangerous place in the world. That 40-kilometre exclusion zone, as I think it's 40 kilometres, are only now getting to the point where people can safely walk through it for a short amount of time. You can't live there. You can't grow food there. And granted, this is a very extreme example of what happens when nuclear goes wrong, but we have that same problem of nuclear waste and what to do with it. Problem number 3 with that system, our stuff breaks and we don't bother trying to fix or recover the materials. We make something, we turn it into something, and then we have absolutely no idea whatsoever what to do with it. Whoops. That's broken. We can't take things out of the ground and predicate our entire economy on things always being there. When we do get it out of the ground, we make products that aren't very good for our ecology. And then when we're done with those things, generally speaking, we either bury it or burn it and have absolutely no idea what to do with it. And in a finite system, that can't work either, because eventually we're going to run out of places to bury things. And if it goes on too far, we will burn off so much of the material wealth of the things that we take out of the ground. Once you burn something, you can't recover anything from it. We would just slowly expend, like we did with oil, all of the material resources out of all of the available resources that we have. So what's the alternative? It's a very rainy day solution, isn't it? What is it that we could physically do as a society to start fixing those problems? You know, we have a problem with what it is that we use, what it is that we make it into, and what is it that we do afterwards. Well, ta-da! That's what I'm here for. There's a thing called the circular economy, and there's the reason that I'm here talking to you about this today, is that in our lifetime, this will happen. Very, very positive about that, because it has to happen. A circular economy is an economy that is restorative and regenerative by design. Circular economy, economic activity, builds and rebuilds overall system health. We heard about that yesterday in permaculture with regards to gardening and replenishing soil and regards to that kind of thing. Actually, you can take that concept and those principles and escalate that onto an entire species level. It's based on 3 principles. Number 1, designing out the waste and the pollution. I did this in the company that I was with before I came here, and they thought, you know, we're just a tiny little engineering firm out the back of Shoebury-Ness. How the hell do we fix the... I gave them quite a scary presentation on the idea that most of their plastic products were going to South Asia and that they should all feel very, very guilty about the fact that they are killing people over there with all sorts of dioxins and toxins being released into the atmosphere when those poor people are having to burn our trash. And I remember the directors of my company just kind of looked at me with almost tears in their eyes and like, well, what can we do? Well, everyone can do everything. Designing out waste and pollution, it sounds like it's one of those things that would be very, very difficult to do. It's not. We'll get onto that in a minute. Keeping products and materials in use. Now, this, at the moment, is what most of the green left and most of the low-HAS market are actually doing. We're starting to talk about using recyclable and reusable tote bags. We're starting to think about buying things that are very, very sustainable, things that will last for a very long time, rather than buying a disposable, coffee cup with your coffee from Starbucks. People are starting to go in with their reusable mugs. And it sounds like a very trivial and small thing, but it actually has a very large cumulative effect and is a core principle of what a circular economy is. Hello, Caroline. Regenerative natural systems and regenerating the natural systems as part of that. What you can actually do with the circular economy as well is you can incentivise businesses and ways of doing things and materials that actually regenerate our natural systems. So what's the first one? Designing out waste and pollution. What if waste and pollution were never created in the first place? That's quite utopian, isn't it? It's very easy to kind of say those kind of things. But a circular economy reveals... Ooh, it's moving my projector. A circular economy reveals and designs out the negative impacts of economic activity that cause damage to human health and natural systems. This includes the release of greenhouse gases and hazardous substances, the pollution of air, land and water, as well as structural waste, and, this is the one that surprises a lot of people, traffic congestion. I used to be a continuous improvement specialist. When we talk about waste, it's not just about what goes in the bin. It's about the amount of effort and energy that you put into something and don't actually get anything out of it, whether it be people going on fag breaks when they're not meant to, or people just sitting around on their phone. That is an inefficiency and waste. And when we're talking about designing out waste and pollution, as we heard from Terence earlier, waste is not just what we put in the bin. It could be heating a pub like this and all of the energy going out of all those windows because they're not double glazed. That's a waste that we can actually cut out. When we talk about design inefficiency and waste in cities and structures, when you design a building, and Richard could probably attest to this, you have to think about people and transport and movement of people, movement of materials and things. When you're designing a city, you can actually start to think of how it is that people move, and you can start eliminating the wastes that occur. A waste of someone sitting at a traffic light is not only a waste of their time, but it's a waste of everybody else's. You can cut those things down. It'll actually cut out quite a lot of pollution and things. Keeping products and materials in use. What if we could build an economy that uses things rather than uses them up? That's quite a clever way of putting that. A circular economy favours activities that preserve value in the form of energy, labour and materials. Basically, a circular economy likes to make things much easier for us. And this means that designing for durability, reuse, remanufacturing and recycling to keep products, components and materials circulating in the economy. This is actually the easiest one to do of all of these things. And when I was at my last company, this was the thing that I kind of really hit home on. I started talking about how we could start building our products out of materials that were readily recyclable. Just one more extra circle in the material usage of those things. We used all sorts of things like APC plastics and things like that, and I started pitching to them about how they could start using products like various metals and coppers and things that, things like aluminium that are almost infinitely recyclable. And I told them that actually they could do it on almost exactly the same cost basis. It doesn't have to be expensive, it just has to be a political choice. Circular systems make effective use of bio-based materials by encouraging many different uses for them as they cycle between the economy and natural systems. Regenerating natural systems. What if we could not only protect, but actively improve the environment using the economic model that we have? That sounds quite mad, doesn't it? The idea that, we're all kind of relatively green people in this room, but what is it? We could create an economic system that by default repairs our environment. Well, we're starting to see this. We're starting to see people choosing more environmentally conscious products, whether that be buying things that are compostable, things that are better active travel arrangements. A circular economy avoids the use of non-renewable resources and preserves or enhances the renewable ones. This is just done by pressuring people into creating the products that we want. If we as a consumer base start demanding that companies and corporations only produce these sustainable products, you'll very quickly see that actually they'll start making them because they still want the money. For instance, by returning valuable nutrients to the soil to support regeneration or using renewable energy as opposed to relying on fossil fuels. That's what a circular economy looks like. It's not as easy as the take, make, dispose model that we had earlier. But basically the idea is that if you make a product out of a finite material at the top, these are these virgin extract resources that we were talking about earlier, and it is manufactured into something and it ends up to you, the consumer, you can share that thing, extending its life. You can maintain or prolong it We were meant to have a repair cafe here today. Unfortunately, we can't. But those kind of initiatives of if something's broken, don't just throw it out. Fix it. If you've got a pair of jeans that are broken, don't just go down to H&M or Primark and buy another one. If it's a tiny little stitch at the side, you can just stitch it back up. It sounds simple, but lots of people don't do this. Reusing and reusing or redistributing, refurbishing and remanufacturing, and recycling. These are all ways in which we start to close the material loop. So rather than it going from take it out of the ground, use it, burn it or bin it, we're starting to see those kind of metals and those coppers being reused. And it also works with regards to renewables as well. You have exactly these same kind of cycles of enriching what it is that you take it from. It's called closing the loop. And you start to see various brands and things are starting to talk about it. I went into H&M a couple of weeks ago, and they've got a great big clothes bin next to the cash-in desk, and they're encouraging people to bring their old clothes back to the store. It doesn't even have to be H&M clothes. You just take it back to the store so that they can recycle the fabrics. And they use that same term, closing the loop. This is the bit that you're going to hate, because I know how awkward it is we all are as British people in talking to people you might not know. But I'd like you to get into groups, and I'd like you to do a little bit of socialising and workshopping. I would like you to, amongst maybe 2 or 3 of you, just have meaningful conversations. Doesn't have to be too long. What kind of products are single use? What are the kinds of things that we buy that follow that very linear pattern that we had before of taking it out of the ground, making it into something, using it, and it then being burnt or buried? What kind of products are those single use? What kind of products could be easily made repairable? This is why I am quite the cyclist. I absolutely love my bike. One of the main reasons being that I built it, and if anything breaks, usually with a bit of persuasion and a bit of time, I can fix it. I think lots of other cyclists are in that same opinion. So what kind of products could be easily made that are repairable? And it's not just that. I know that there's a thing that's out there at the moment called the Fair phone. Have we heard of this? Yeah. It's wonderful. The idea is that rather than just getting, and I'm as guilty as everybody else, I haven't got it on me, of just having one of those smartphones that you get off the shelf. What if we started investing into smartphones and technology that if a certain capacitor or certain chips and batteries and screens fail, rather than just kind of putting it in the bin and hoping that the various metals and things get recycled, what if we start investing in those things that are inherently repairable? If a chip breaks, take it down to the shop, someone puts a new chip in it, your phone's fine. When something breaks in your phone, I can guarantee you it will be 1 or 2 tracks on a PCB. If something genuinely catastrophic happens on your phone that it's so horrendously just doesn't even turn on, it'll be 1 or 2 things that, with a soldering iron and a little bit of canny, you can probably fix yourself, especially on those kind of Fairphone things. It's teaching people the electronics, and it's teaching people the way in which they can fix the products that they possess. And how could you apply circular thinking to what you do, make or build? We all do things. I've shown this slide before where people have said, well, I don't make anything, I don't build anything. Well, actually, I think you find you do. So in your group, start to think of these kind of things. We'll do that for about 10 or 15 minutes or so, and then we'll see what you kind of come up with. Does that sound like a plan? Let's do that. Right. Off you pop.
Okay. I work as a healthcare professional. I work in a theatre department. A lot of it has to do with not having anything that's reused because of any cross-contamination. So you can deal with a lot of people that have got bloodborne diseases or anything like that. So a lot of these single-use things, you'll have like an IV given set for fluids and for bloods that will be thrown away. Well, obviously all of that's then made of plastics. It's made of petrochemical plastics, the ones that won't be easily recycled or biodegraded, and none of it can really be recycled. The packaging kind of, but because a lot of it is treated and sterilised, the process of doing that and the chemicals that are involved, all the radiations involved alter the makeup of it, meaning that it's really difficult to recycle. Just as a really harrowing thing from our beloved healthcare system, up the NHS.
Anyone else got some points? I can walk around with the microphone, but you don't have to be as loud as Reese, visually and sonically.
I've never not seen or heard.
Anyone over here want to kind of say anything about?
Spectacles. They're not single use, but obviously when you don't need them
So I don't know if you guys heard that at the front, but basically the lady over here was talking about reading glasses, spectacles. What happens when, obviously, you have them pretty much made for you, your own prescription and things? What is it that happens when you have those glasses that run out? That's a very good point. Anybody else got anything that they want to kind of pitch in or say? No? Water bottles, that's a good one.
There was more dispensing in the streets, in the places, we've got to use it to make one problem the whole day.
Yes, we were saying about refillable water bottles and things over here. If there were more available places to refill your water bottles, then actually more people would probably carry around a reusable and refillable water bottle. If you, those of you that aren't aware of the refill scheme, we're kind of lucky enough that here at the railway we are part of the refill scheme. It's a free app. Very highly recommend it. There are lots of places in London, and we're starting to get there in Southend. I was lucky enough to actually help pilot the scheme of the refill scheme in Southend, getting in touch with lots of pubs and bars and things across Southend. Basically, just trying to encourage businesses to fill up people's water bottles with water. It costs them almost nothing, and actually it brings people into those shops, so you can make quite a good business case for those kind of things. So thankfully, various places across Southend are now part of that refill scheme. So if you do carry a reusable water bottle, do download the refill app, because then you can see where those locations are. We've got quite a few of them on the seafront, because we're hoping that this summer we can try and pitch to all of the people that are coming to sunny Southend for a summer holiday and visiting the beach and things, that rather than getting infinite amounts of water bottles from the traders on the seafront, actually, if you just bring a refillable water bottle, we could try and get some semi-permanent stations along the seafront to actually just refill those bottles. If that happens or not, don't know. We shall try. Go on.
Just might be worth, because obviously, as a seaside town, we profit from trade. It might be worth, if you're going to approach those individual vendors, to kind of go, why not sell like little reusable Southend branded water bottles?
Mm-hmm. Capitalism is everywhere. You can market the greenest thing and still make a profit off it. Yeah, so we spoke about single use. Did anyone get onto the whole kind of what products could be made that are easily repairable? Did anyone get to that stage? Most products can be repairable.
It's to make the manufacturer make the spares easily available so those products can be repairable. I mean, in the 1970s, I was a service engineer and I repaired kettles and toasters. But people don't do that anymore because it costs more to get the spares than it does to repair the product.
Yeah, there's also quite often a very big problem with repair that companies actually stop people from doing so. Apple, for example, actively seek out people who aren't authorised Apple resellers and prevent them from making those repairs, making it really hard for them to get the supplies. There's a guy on YouTube, Lewis Rossman, who is based in New York and is putting a lot of work into going into court where there are cases relevant to the right to repair, to try and actually make that happen, because Apple's just one example, but there are lots of companies who are building in obsolescence and then making it impossible for you to repair the products yourself, even if they won't.
Running with a microphone, it's like conference now, isn't it?
Yeah, I've got a good example of not built-in obsolescence. My Magimix, which I'd had for 27 years, the lid broke, and I got in touch with the company that used to supply me with spares, and they said, really sorry, but now your 27-year-old Magimix is out of support, but if you buy this whole new jug, you can continue to use the motor. So I now have a new jug and some new blades and things, but basically I'm still using the same motor. So it's kind of, I just sort of feel like Magimix need a little bit of a cheer because they're doing a good job.
And I've heard that Caroline's muffins and cakes are absolutely delicious. So it's obviously a very good mixer. Happy to endorse.
If there was less of this copyright issue for for products, and more modular-based products, maybe we could reduce waste there. But
Well, that's
again,
something Fairphone are doing.
oh yeah, of course, yeah.
Yeah, so the right to repair is something someone said earlier. I think Dennis was saying it. Thankfully, the EU started talking about this kind of this idea that if you've got a washing machine, you know, when it breaks, rather than just going out and getting an entire new washing machine, there's probably just one very small part of that you should be able to just send back to the manufacturer and get fixed. You know, extended warranties, repairs, and all those kind of things. You know, and as Dennis said earlier, with regards to patents and copyrights, these are just companies who are just ultimately they want to sell products, and so they've created various ways of patenting things and putting in kind of manufacturers' rights that prevent people from fixing things. You see on the internet all the time, the BBC, I think, you know, it was probably a couple of years or so ago now, they did a kind of like a 5-minute news segment. They went into a high school and they got a load of the kids in there and they gave them a kettle that didn't work or something like that, and they said, change the plug, fix it, change the plug. Every single kid in that classroom was like, we'll just get a new kettle. Or actually, you just think that basic repair that a lot of people were taught, you know, only 20 years or so ago, the idea of rewiring a plug, that kind of home economics, being able to fix things that break. We seem to have really kind of moved on from that. You know, it's a shame that we don't seem to be talking about wanting to fix and mend and repair and all those kind of things. You know, thankfully we're lucky enough in Southend that the Southend in Transition people do a repair cafe quite regularly, in which, you know, people that are just generally quite enthusiastic will sit in usually a church hall or a pub and try and fix any and all manner of things that are broken. And, you know, some of it's just curtains and fabrics and stuff, but sometimes, you know, I was there at the one in Shoebury a couple of months ago. Someone brought in a Hoover that hadn't worked for about a year, and thankfully the person hadn't thrown it out. They brought it in, it was a relatively easy fix, and one working Hoover. Ta-ha. So the last one, how could you apply circular thinking to what you do, make and build? This question gets made quite a lot, the idea that actually it's companies entirely responsible for starting to think about how it is that we can start closing these loops. Well, actually, we as individual consumers and we as people that do and make and build and plan and all sorts, we do have the capacity to start thinking in a circular economic fashion. There are all sorts of books available from various different bookshops. Please go and get yourself a book on circular economic thinking, because once you start getting in that mindset of, if this breaks, how could I fix this? And once you start asking yourselves those questions, you actually start being able to upskill yourself, and you know, inherently become much more green. I think it's probably something you'd all enjoy. So, what do you think? Do you like it? Yeah. Good. Go on, Reece.
Sorry, it's me again. Shut up. For those who don't know who I am James's other half. I now live with this model. I never knew really how to fix a bike, how to fix anything at all. I'm wired in a different way, meaning basically that I'm quite dyslexic, so books are very difficult. But you can find everything you need on YouTube. Literally, you want to learn how to repair a bike, you go on YouTube and find it. And as an individual, it has revolutionised my life. Just looking at things instead of going, "No, fuck that." Oh, sorry.
No, please do swear.
Now fuck that, I'll throw it in the bin, now I'll go get something else. You just go, no, hang on a moment, can I fix it? It's just time, knowledge and effort, and I am my own proof. I mean, the garment I am wearing is literally, I took an old pair of dungarees, I fixed them, and I made them weird. My point to all of this is that all you've got to do is just shift that little bit of thinking, and you can completely revolutionise your life and do it. So from an individual basis, this type of thinking, and James himself has made a massive impact, not only on me, in fact, actually on our household.
Oh, that's sweet, thanks. So as someone who is kind of recently a landlord, and by landlord I mean in the publican sense, this is a 148-year-old building. It is now my hobby. Every waking moment of my life is fixing something that has gone wrong in here. And just over the last sort of 7 or 8 months, because I've been here since July, I think, I have taught myself so many skills because of YouTube. And bless those people that go on YouTube and spend an afternoon making a video showing people that might not know how to fix something, how to fix something. This kind of anarchistic principle of knowledge exchange for no money. You teach someone how to, you know, how to fish, you can feed them forever, whatever the saying is. You know, the idea is that you actually show people how it is that they can repair things. You can, A, subvert capitalism, but also you're giving someone the power to be able to enjoy those things that they like for much longer. Bicycles being one of them. This circular economy stuff sounds marvellous. It is. But how do we get there? We currently have that linear economic model, but we need to move. Is it that we start talking about circular economy in a way that we can start getting those companies on board and starting to do those kind of things? Well, thankfully, there's this wonderful institution called the European Union that I absolutely love. Yes, woo the EU! Woo the EU, please do. In March, well, as recently as March 2019, but they've been talking about it for a very long time, started talking about the circular economy package, introducing an implementation report covering the full circular economy. Basically, the EU started talking about shifting on an entire kind of continent level, all of those countries to start basically forcing and encouraging them to start adopting these circular economic principles. You know, it sets out 54 ways in which they can close the loop of product lifestyles, a major emphasis on finding new innovative ways to move away from a take, make, dispose culture. You know, the benefits being 450 million fewer tonnes of EU carbon emissions by 2030, just a decade away. You know, savings of 600 billion euros for EU businesses, which is 8% of their annual turnover. 500,000 new jobs. The action plan's also accompanied by a lot of funding. Thankfully, our country did something very, very silly. Damn. So how else can we get there? How else can we start talking about, you know, we haven't got the EU on our side to start talking about consumer protections and being able to fix things and do all that kind of stuff. How is it that we now get the circular economy going in the UK if we've no longer got the EU to kind of help us? Think and talk about circular economic thinking at work, with friends and at home. Like this little discussion that we've had now has occupied about an hour of your life. You can pretty much summarise all of this in a 5-minute conversation with your family, with your colleagues, in a work environment, and just even in and around the home. Convince others to read up on material sustainability. And when I mean material sustainability, I mean things like, is this compostable? Easy questions that you can start asking yourself. And environmentally conscious product design. Is this a durable product? You know, adopt some of the principles in your own life. Buy once, use multiple times. We do it with bags, bottles, and we're starting to get there with that stuff. Buy and or make a more durable product. If it costs £2 more to get something that looks like it's going to last 3 times longer, then surely it makes economic sense to buy the slightly more expensive thing that's going to last you a hell of a lot longer. Start asking yourself 3 questions, and I'm going to ask you all to do this, just for the rest of today. What is this made from? Pick up something, you know, at some point throughout the rest of the day, and ask yourself, what's it made from? Where did those materials come from? Is it compostable? You know, we talk quite a lot about, it's biodegradable. You know, they start talking about all those plastic packagings and things that are biodegradable. Well, much of those things that are labelled as biodegradable actually are oxydegradable, which just means that they break down into tiny, tiny, tiny pieces of plastic that you wouldn't be able to see. The problem's still there. It's still the same amount of plastic. It hasn't just vanished. It's just broken down into so many small pieces that you can't actually see, and it becomes more of a problem. I think it was one of the big supermarkets started rolling out eco carrier bags and things that actually were in no way eco. Is it compostable? When we say compostable, we were talking about building regenerative life cycles for products. If you're making something out of, say, a plant, generally speaking, as long as you don't kind of do too much in the process of manufacture, that will then naturally break down to all the constituent plant parts and chemicals and enzymes that plant actually used to make itself in the first place. So start asking yourself, could you put that in a compost bin and it'd be all right? The last one, could I use this for anything else once I'm done with it? You pick up a plastic bottle, something like that. Initially you think, okay, it must have one function. Well, as we saw with the permaculture course that we had here yesterday, one thing can have hundreds of functions. You know, we see reuse and upcycling of various different products and materials. start asking yourselves, is there anything else that I could use this product for once I'm done with it? If it's just to hold up your bookshelf, or if it's just to plant saplings and seedlings and things in, you're extending the natural life of that product, even if it is only for a little bit more. It's a concerted effort towards the right direction. Thank you very much. Now, as I gave a bit of a... Oh, yeah. As I gave a bit of a kind of a caveat at the start of this, I'm in absolutely no way an expert in circular economic thinking. I was lucky enough that in my last job, they paid me to sit around and not do a lot. And I got to read up on all these things that I really, really enjoy. But by all means, if you've got any questions, I will try and answer them to the best of my ability. Does anyone have any questions? Hang on.
It's not so much a question as a comment, but for the London election for the Mayor of London, we're putting a policy in place for our manifesto, which is to have a waste reduction target for London. Because at the moment in London, we've got targets for increasing percentages of recycling, but if the overall pot of stuff that is being got rid of is growing, yes, your recycling target percentage might go up, but it's doing absolutely nothing to reduce the amount of stuff that is being turned over. So it's something that I think Greens across the country could be trying to get their local authorities to have an overall waste reduction target, so that the volume of stuff being incinerated and buried and, disposed of in various ways reduces.
I just wanted to make a comment about your reference to the EU and the excellent legislation that they're working on for circular and right to repair and so on. Apart from sort of promoting it individually, the other things that we can do since Brexit are firstly aim to make it that any trade deal that we get with the EU, the EU is likely to want us to align with their new rules, and we're likely to have to align with their new rules. And that should mean that the effect is the same as if we were in, we'll have to comply. Because that's the way that the EU exercises its soft power across the world in its trade deals. And hopefully we can cross our fingers that they will also have the same effect on, say, China, for example. And if China can't export things to the EU unless they're part of this right to repair thing, then chances are that the same thing will happen for things that are coming to us. It's very unlikely that China will make things that are less good for, well, of course, we might want things that are less good and cheaper, but we need to try to put pressure on the politicians to make sure that they do reflect the same standards in this country as they're getting in the EU, in whatever way we can.
Thank you very much. Very good points. Anyone else got anything else that they want to say, or any questions, or... No, wonderful. A quick point on things like the responsible waste strategy. Cracking that they're doing that in London. We're also trying to do that in Southend as well. So in our local party manifesto, which we published for last year's local elections, one of the key points that we had in there was talking about a responsible waste strategy. And it's really, really boring on the doorstep. Most people really don't want to hear about where their rubbish goes and things, but actually it's one of the most core and important parts of our local party manifesto. So if you have the chance, if you are Southend based, or even if you're not, please do go and have a look at our local party manifesto with regards to stuff that we're doing, or we're trying to push our local council and various, it's not just council but also businesses. I'm lucky enough that being a town centre business here, I get invited to all of the Southend bid, which is the business improvement district. The town centre businesses get together and they talk about things. I'm lucky enough that I tend to usually go along into a room of very old white men as a young business owner, and I get to talk about environmentalism and things. And I used to go along just as a representative of the Green Party before we ended up with the town centre business. And they used to laugh at me when I used to sit there and say about businesses need to start thinking about zero waste targets and veganism and various ecological thinking training and things. Now I go back to those meetings as someone who's running a business that does that. And they don't laugh anymore. Yeah, I'd like to thank everyone that's kind of pitched in with the workshop today. Please don't run off. What we're going to do is we're going to have a slight schedule change with regards to the fact that Caroline Russell will be speaking pretty much immediately after me. And then I think we're also going to have Catherine Rowett speak fairly closely after that as well, then allowing everybody to have a bit of a break before all the bands start this evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, James. And as you were saying, Caroline Russell is up next. We'll have a 10-minute break, so that's an opportunity to get a drink at the bar. And we'll see you back here in 10 minutes' time.